So everybody is listening, including Sister Norma Elaine. Thank you so much for coming back. I'm going to do the thing what everybody hates, but if you were mindful to come a little closer to the front, then you won't miss anything. You can sit there.
One, two.
Oh, you're not going to change it? No. Okay. So, thank you for coming back to the afternoon program, Possibilities Ministry. There are different throngs to the ministry, and so we wanted to focus a little on mental health. And we're going to start with... I'm forgetting, that might be a sign. Anyway, imagine that it was a sign. You're supposed to now start thinking of how you would care for me. And that's the thing, because we have to be our brother's keeper. So if it looks like every conversation you have with me, I'm forgetting something, then maybe we should address it. But we're going to hear a little bit more about that in a minute. Our speaker this afternoon, we have two speakers. Where are the interpreters? So we have two presenters, Dr. Nomsa, behind you, and Dr. Anslim. I've eaten too much, Dr. Anslim. And we're starting with dementia simply because the numbers are going up where we're concerned. And we have to look at how we live our life, how we rest. But I'm not going to pretend to be the expert here. Dr. Nomsa is going to tell you about that. What we would like you to do at the end of both presentations is to have your questions. And no question is a foolish question. It's in your mind, so it needs to be addressed. So we're going to do that. I say one thing about Dr. Nomsa. I don't yet know her. Willing. She never said can't do to any of my requests. And there were a few. And she was always very willing. So I want to thank you for that. And thank you for your patience and coming all the way from Southampton. Thank you. I know we're going to be blessed. And we're very, very grateful that you're here. And I'm waiting to be inspired. I know I will be. And then, of course, we have Dr. Anslim Anslim Narinesingh, I think is the right pronunciation. Is that right pronunciation? Thank you. And he's going to look at autism and ADHD and Down syndrome. So we are in for a blessing. Let's stand for prayer. Father God in heaven, Lord, we thank you so much for your goodness and your mercy and your grace towards us. Not because we are deserving, but you give good gifts and you love us as your children. And time again, you show us just how much you love us. We thank you for the day we've had so far. We thank you for the food and the nourishment to our bodies. And Lord, as you now educate us, as you open our minds, as you show us where we need to be in regards to our mental health, we pray that every droplet that we will collect one way or another. Father, thank you and bless us, I pray. Open our minds. In Jesus' name, we welcome Dr. Nomsa.
Okay, so afternoon, everyone. Thank you very much for that warm welcome, Sister Mali. Yeah, it was good, nice to correspond with someone, and it's a pleasure to visit Wilsden. I think it's my first time coming here for a service, but I have been to the building before. So my talk today, as you can see, is preventing and delaying Alzheimer's dementia. And I just want to share a little bit of hope, I suppose, from this talk, that although Alzheimer's is a devastating illness, and as we've heard, it is on the increase, but there is hope, and there are some studies that are showing that there are things we can do individually and even as a community to delay the onset of Alzheimer's. There are also some signs that some of these same things can also maybe prevent getting it, and for those who have Alzheimer's, it can reverse some of the worrying signs of Alzheimer's and make it a more manageable disease. So I'm going to be talking about dementia as a whole, but as we'll learn, Alzheimer's dementia in itself is the most common, the most wide, the highest incidence. So when we talk about dementia, let's think about that, because I won't say Alzheimer's all the time. Okay. So what is dementia exactly? So dementia is actually a symptom or a condition which is made up of a group of symptoms. So we look at a decline in memory, a decline in being in some social activities, but the decline is enough for this to interfere with somebody's daily activities. There are different stages of that decline. Sometimes it's just the memory aspect, or someone cannot organize their lives very well, or especially things which was what we call executive functions, so planning, making decisions. But then later on, we find it starts to affect even the basic things, so caring for yourself. And there are different kinds of dementia. So the most common are Alzheimer's and then vascular dementia. Alzheimer's dementia is about, depending which country you're at, about 50 to 75%, and then vascular dementia about 20%. Okay, sorry. Vascular dementia, about 20%. And then the other dementia, so Lewy body dementia, which is associated with Parkinson's disease in some cases, and also frontotemporal dementia. There are also many other causes of dementia that I won't go into. Some are linked to physical diseases. Some are linked to vitamin deficiencies, for example. But these make up a smaller percentage of the types of dementia that we have. And putting things into perspective, so dementia is now the most common cause of death in the UK, which I found surprising when I first heard about this. And the number of people living with dementia is expected to triple by 2050. And that's really mainly because people's life expectancy the number of people, the older people, are expected to rise in the country. And of course, amongst a lot of people, dementia is much more feared than even cancer itself, because it can be a long, protracted illness for some people. So Alzheimer's in particular, as I mentioned, we consider it as a progressive illness, so it gets worse. And it's degenerative, so you have destruction of certain parts of the brain, which I'll share. As I said, it's a loss of memory, thinking, language skills, and also later on a loss of independence. At the moment, we don't really have a cure for Alzheimer's, so it's essentially considered an irreversible condition. But there are some aspects that can be improved, and that's something I'd like to share. So some of the things we look at in the brain, so what do we see in somebody's brain when somebody's got Alzheimer's? And these studies are usually done, unfortunately, after somebody has died, but there are new ways of being able to investigate this even before someone has died. So there's two main mechanisms that happen in the brain. First, you have this substance called beta amyloid, and it's a type of protein that collects around the neurons, so around the nerve fibers which are in the brain. And that means that there's lots of debris and it interferes with the communication. And the second mechanism is that you have these things called neurofibrillary tangles. They're a bit difficult to see in the slide, but they're within, if you look at the little picture of the cell, they're within the cell. And they also, it's another type of protein that builds up and then also slows the communication that's happening and the action of that cell. What happens, I'll just go back to that. So these neurofibrillary tangles and the amyloids together cause an inflammation. So inflammation is more like an irritation. If you've got a cell that's damaged. Sorry. I'm fine. Sorry, okay. If you have a cell anywhere in the body that's damaged, the body wants to repair it. And it uses other cells and other chemicals to come to that cell to repair it. And then all that action is called inflammation. And then that can damage the cell that's affected, but also damage the cells around the nerve.
Inflammation, please. Can you break down?
Inflammation. Okay, that's so. So as I said, inflammation is so if a cell is damaged, the body then uses other cells, which are it's a repair mechanism to come and fix the damage that's happened. But while it's fixing that damage, there can be chemical reactions while it's fixing it that then cause further damage around the other cells, which may be normal cells. And then that's what we would call it inflammation. I think that's the best explanation I can use. And so that inflammation and that damage around those cells that have that amyloid and those tangles is then what disturbs the communication between the cells and slows things down. And that's why you then have Alzheimer's and other nerve conditions. So this damage can happen in two main parts of the brain. The one part of the brain where this happens is an area called the hippocampus. So it's the little red stripe that you see there. And in the hippocampus is where the cells that help our memory are mainly located. So when these cells are damaged, we have a loss of memory and different kinds of memory located there. The other type of damage can happen in the nerve cells that are in the cortex, so that's the main part of the brain. And these are the areas of our brain linked with judgment, as I said, making decisions, planning, learning. And when these cells are damaged, then that aspect is also then affected within dementia. Okay. Sorry, going the other way. All right. So some people will not develop full dementia, so they don't have all the criteria, so to speak, of dementia, but they have what we call the cognitive impairment. So in some domains, they're not functioning at the optimum. But it's not enough for us to say, actually, this person has got dementia. Some of these people will get better. So we know that certain things like if you're depressed or if you're very stressed or old age in general, some people fluctuate in the way their memory works. So some of those will get better. But we need to be cautious because some people in this group will then go on to develop Alzheimer's dementia later on. And others in that group as well will just stay at that, what we call cognitive impairment, maybe for the rest of their lives. But it's something to watch out for if we see it happening in ourselves or a friend. Okay, sorry. Sorry, one slide too late. Apologies. This thing is a bit tricky. Yes, okay. So how do we find out if somebody actually has got dementia? A lot of times it's actually family and friends of the person who will bring a patient to the doctor or discuss it amongst the family because they've noticed things that the person might not be doing as usual. So as I said, sometimes loss of memory. Sometimes a person is delegating decisions to someone else. It could be accidents that have happened at home. Various things that people then see that a person is not functioning at the optimum, and they bring the person to the doctor. The other things as well that we have to, when the person is then brought to the doctor or a clinician, there's different things that we can test to check. So first, we want to make sure, is this dementia or not? So looking at the common things that can cause a memory decline. So depression is one of the most common things that can be confused with dementia, and this is this is more common. This can be more common in elderly folk who are now living on their own, and this is one thing that we have to screen for and treat if we feel that could be a cause of dementia. We also look for vitamin deficiencies. So whenever a patient, before we send them to the specialist, as a GP, I don't treat dementia as such, but there's a battery of tests that we do. So they include things like vitamin B12, iron, folic acid, because these vitamins, if they're low, can cause somebody to slow down and not function as well. We also look for other conditions. So we often test for thyroid, with the thyroid hormone, because if your thyroid levels are low for a long time, that can put you at a risk of dementia as well. So these are things we check for. And if we do all these tests and also some other screening tests, questionnaires, after that, then we can say the chances are this person has Alzheimer's dementia or another type of dementia. We don't really have a diagnosis. Sorry. Okay, switching. Okay, sorry. At the moment, we can't really test somebody for Alzheimer's. There's no chemical test like other conditions, because to actually diagnose Alzheimer's, you need to get a biopsy of the brain, so we don't do that. Often we will do CT scans or MRI scans, but again, that is to rule out conditions that could cause memory problems, so even tumors or in the case of things like vascular dementia, you can see areas where there have been strokes or a loss of blood supply to certain areas of the brain. So Alzheimer's is what we usually call a diagnosis of exclusion. So exclude all the other things, and if everything else is normal, then we say, okay, maybe this person's got Alzheimer's disease. All right. So, all right. So, yes? You can go ahead, I think. Yeah.
And how does Parkinson's type dementia, how does that relate to dementia and Alzheimer's?
Yeah.
Is it some process, is it like Alzheimer's? How are they all types of dementia?
Okay. So Alzheimer's is a type of dementia. So it's the most common kind of dementia. And as I said, often we say someone's Alzheimer's when we've excluded all the other causes. We can't exclude everything, but we'll say, okay, more or less this person has got Alzheimer's. Parkinson's disease is a different condition. So Parkinson's disease affects the motor system primarily. There's an area in the brain which has dopamine. So people with Parkinson's, for example, will start having tremors. They might walk slowly. They might be prone to falls. But as Parkinson progresses in some people, there is a dementia that's associated with Parkinson's disease. So if a person starts to show memory problems, I think the definition is within a year of being diagnosed of motor Parkinson's, then we call it Parkinson's dementia. And I think I mentioned a dementia called Lewy body dementia. It's a special kind of, the cells that are affected are different, and they seem to think there's a link between that and Parkinson's. But you can have Parkinson's disease without having the memory problems. Does that make sense? Yeah, so memory and function, yeah. Yeah, okay. Thank you for the question. All right. To understand what we can do to prevent or delay or improve dementia, we need to look at what are the risk factors for dementia. All right, I'll take the last question because I don't know how the questions are going to be. Yes? Most men have? Parkinson's disease. All right, so I'm not a Parkinson's expert, but I'm not too sure. I'm honestly, I don't know what the incidence is for Parkinson's in men. I'm just trying to think. You most should be right that there are more men, but I don't know the mechanisms and why off the top of my head. I'd need to look at it. Okay, all right. Okay, all right, yeah, okay, because fine. Because I'm going to be a little bit slower than I was expecting to be, so that's great. Okay, so so when we want to look at dementia and how we can improve or reverse it, well, not reverse it, prevent it, we need to look at the risk factors. So what makes somebody at higher risk of having dementia? A study that was done in published in the Lancet, which is a medical journal, and also other studies, show that about 40% of cases of dementia could be prevented if some of the risk factors I'm going to share are reversed or eliminated. We're being encouraged to try and be ambitious about preventing these risk factors because, as we're saying, dementia is going to be increasing. And also, what was interesting when I was looking at this paper was that dementia is actually increasing in even not only in our advanced countries, because we think that's the case, but in less advanced, the lower middle income countries, there's also an increase of dementia there. So I'm going to just go through some of those risk factors and then things that we can do to reduce them. So I'll just share also some risk factors or things that we can't do anything about. So the older you get, the higher chances are of getting dementia. So some of the statistics say that above the age of 65, which is what we call old age in medical terms, you kind of maybe a 1 in 7, 1 in 8 chance of getting dementia or some form of mild cognitive impairment. And as you're getting older, so up to people reaching the 80s, 90s, it goes up to maybe about a 30% chance of getting dementia. So, age is something we can't do about, and our risk increases that way. Some people, as I said, have got this mild cognitive impairment that also increases your risk. People with learning disabilities, we're going to hear a little bit later on about certain conditions, so things like Down syndrome and other learning difficulties can also increase your chances of dementia. And there are a few genetic conditions that can also put you at a risk of dementia. But we're going to talk mainly about things that we can change in our lives. Okay, so what is quite surprising is actually so before I do that, I'm going to split it into 3 groups. So things that are in early life, so childhood, and middle life up to 45, and then middle life, and then later life. So what are the things that put you at risk of dementia in these 3 stages? So in early life, what is really surprising is people who haven't reached a high level of education are at a slightly higher risk of getting dementia. And actually, this was found to be maybe one of the largest contributing factors to your risk of dementia. So it's really important to encourage education in early life. Okay, I'll go through some of these in a bit more detail later on. Hearing loss was the other thing that was very important. So as people are getting older, it's important, if you find that your hearing is impaired, to attend to that. I'll go a bit in more detail later on. Traumatic brain injuries. So we've heard about footballers and young children and the changes that are in the sport industry, especially to reduce traumatic brain injury, because that can put you at a risk of dementia later on in life. High blood pressure, excessive alcohol consumption, and also weight in middle and later years. So it's important to try and make sure weight is below the BMI of 30. In later life, some of the risk factors are smoking, depression, social isolation, physical inactivity, diabetes, and also air pollution. So these are some of the 12 things that they found in this study that put you at a risk of dementia. So I'll go through some of them in a little more detail. I won't go through all of them. So the first one I'd mentioned before was we need to promote education in early life. So as I said, early life was considered up to 45 years. So cognitive stimulation and learning throughout life, but particularly in early life, helps to build up our cognitive reserve. So the more you learn, the more learn means that you have more cognitive capacity. So if you're to lose some of that, it won't be as bad as if somebody hasn't learned as much in early life, okay? And this is really important, and we need to encourage our children. I was really pleased to see, the Pathfinder Bible experience. Our church did that as well, and it's very lovely to see the children beating us when we did our church versus Pathfinders competition. We were just, wiped out. So that's really something that we have to encourage now in our children and young people. And if you haven't been able to do that maybe as a child, you can still build that up even later on in life. So things that are important, things like puzzles, reading, memorizing scripture, telephone numbers, I think I only know my own mobile number these days, but if you can do that, learning musical instruments, learning a language in particular is very good for brain development as well. Coming to hearing loss, there was a study that showed that people who had low scores on the hearing test later on had lower scores on the cognitive tests as well. And that's because if you're not hearing everything that's going on around you, you're missing out on information that can stimulate your brain. And often, sometimes, as people are getting older, they feel embarrassed to wear the hearing aids or to get support with their hearing. But it's very important in the middle and later years to make sure that you get tested for your hearing if you're worried about it in any way, and then get support with that. To protect your brain, and so that you can engage with all the other things going on in your life. Sorry. Okay. All right. Fine. So dementia then, in some cases, is being now considered as what we call a metabolic disease. So the metabolic diseases are those diseases like high blood pressure, diabetes, obesity, which together put you at a higher risk of having heart disease. And strokes, and they see, those conditions are quite common and are linked very strongly to lifestyle. So there are some signs when we look at the brain that Alzheimer's could be acting in a similar way, and some people even call it type 3 diabetes. That's because when you look at under the microscope and you look at some of the cells, they found that those amyloid fibers that I mentioned before, in the middle of some of the clumps of amyloid fibers, they've seen cholesterol crystals in that. And we know that high cholesterol is also part of this metabolic disease. And also we know that insulin as well, if the brain cells are not reacting to insulin, just like our pancreas and other parts of the body, if they have this insulin resistance, then you've got higher blood sugars, and then putting your brain at risk of damage and that inflammation and stress that I was talking about later on. So we don't know all the mechanisms yet, but if it acts in this way, then those same things that we do to prevent things like diabetes, high blood pressure, high cholesterol, are also going to help us prevent and improve dementia as well. So I'm just going to share a few studies. So there was the Adventist Health study that was done in California, which compared Seventh-day Adventists. It looked at Seventh-day Adventists who have different kinds of diets. And one of the things they saw that people who were vegetarians for longer than 30 years had a 3 times lower risk of dementia. So it showed that a whole food plant-based diet provides lots of antioxidants that are protective against the rusting of the brain. So when we have this inflammatory process, this inflammation, the body produces, the cells produce oxygen, and oxygen is toxic, a certain kind of oxygen, and oxygen can be toxic to the cells. So an antioxidant kind of neutralizes that toxicity. So there's certain chemicals that are in plants that help to reduce that toxicity and then reduce inflammation, which we can even consider as maybe a rusting of the brain, just like oxygen destroys metal and forms rust. Sorry, I'm going the other way. All right. Another study that was quite interesting I found this in the BBC quite some years ago, there's a specific gene called the APOE4 gene, E4 gene, and this is common. This has been found to increase somebody's risk of dementia. So, it's about 2 times the risk. But they noticed that certain areas in Nigeria, which is in Africa, they had high levels of this gene, but they noticed that they've got low levels of dementia in that community. And it's called the Nigerian paradox. And what they think is the explanation is that those areas in Nigeria where they still have a diet that's very high in fruit and vegetables and low in cholesterol and low in fat and a low-calorie diet put you at a lower risk of dementia. So it can be beneficial to have such kind of a diet to reduce dementia. Okay. Again, this is another dietary study. So the Mediterranean diet, which we know is also high in vegetables, low in animal fat and high in fruit. This was also found to improve people's cognitive performance in healthy older patients. So meaning that later on in life, you'd hopefully have a lower risk of having dementia. Okay. All right. Okay. And again, I'll go through this briefly. So the fruit and vegetables and berries in particular have substances which are, the names are things like polyphenols and flavonoids. Those are fancy names. But again, they do that same thing. They sweep up all those toxic chemicals that are floating around in our bloodstream and reduce inflammation and improve the signaling and communication between the nerve cells. So we should have lots of those in our diets. I'll skip that one. So another study also showed that having smaller meals seemed to improve your lifespan. So this was improve your cognitive function and even maybe your lifespan. So this was a test that was done on healthy people. They reduced the proportion of the plate by 15% over a long period of time. And they found that when they did tests, some of the people had improved mood and they had lower risk of some of the diseases associated with old age. There's also some guidance as well from a book that I'll show you later on that suggests having a 12-hour fast as well from between your last meal and in the day. So usually that fast would be at night. So you'd have your last meal, for example, at 6 o'clock, and then not have anything else until breakfast the next day at 6. So having that 12-hour fast helps to rest the body and also improve the repair mechanisms in your brain as well. So that's something we can try. This is just a quick summary of some guidelines. I've mentioned the one about the fasting, but so remove simple carbohydrates, so things like your sugars, your refined grains, processed foods as well. So try to remove those from your diet if you want to increase your cognitive function. Have a diet rich in fruit and vegetables. If you're a vegan sometimes you might need to get your B12 tested. You might have to get a vitamin supplement for B12. Some studies, and I know Dr. Chidi's, if you've watched his series on dementia, he recommends us having vitamin D supplement every single day. The doses vary between people you study with, but 1,000, 2,000 units is a safe amount to have every single day but again, it's worth getting tested if you can before you go down having the high doses of vitamin D. Okay. There's just a quick study I wanted to share again. Turmeric is a herb. Okay, I'm sure you can see. Oh, you can't see the picture. Okay, that's fine. But I'm sure most of us know what turmeric is. It's a root, and it's usually crushed yellow-orange color. So this is a herb that's made quite a lot of news in health. People who read health news. It's also an anti-inflammatory herb. So again, it does the sweeping up of debris around nerve cells, but also in other parts of the body as well. So there was a study that was done in Japan, just a case study of 3 patients. They gave these patients a 12-week treatment of turmeric capsules. And what they found after these 12 weeks, and they actually continued the study for another year, there was no improvement in their mental health, in their memory. So these were patients who had dementia. So it sounds, when you read that, think, oh, that's very disappointing. But actually what they found was the patients, although their memory didn't improve, they had improved behavior. So these patients, for example, were patients who were not able to express when they needed to use the toilet or attend to themselves. But after this treatment with turmeric, they were able to recognize their relatives, attend to some of their own personal needs. They had improved behavior within the nursing home and also participated more in some of the activities within that home. And this is very important if you're caring for somebody with dementia, to see these changes in someone. It can make your life much more pleasant, and especially if somebody can recognize you as well. So we're not saying that you should go and have high-dose turmeric as yet. It was just a small study, and there are more studies to be done. And I guess there's no harm in adding turmeric to your cooking, but I wouldn't take it at high doses because it does have some side effects that you have to be aware of. So if you're on other medications, like blood thinners, for example, or aspirin, they can interact with turmeric, and it can cause toxicity to the liver if you're taking it at very high doses. So this is something more like, let's watch the space and see what we find out later on. But it gives us a little bit of hope that certain substances might be able to help in the treatment of dementia. Aerobic exercise is really important in helping either people with dementia or for us preventing dementia. So when we increase our levels of activity, we increase our blood circulation all over our body and also to the brain. And in the brain, this stimulates this substance called brain-derived neurotropic factor. I had to put it there. I love that word. But it's more like brain food, as one author puts it. And this actually stimulates the increase in the growth of that area, the hippocampus that I showed earlier. If you remember, there's a little red stripe. And that's the area of memory. So in a study that they did, when people exercise more, they saw that the volume of that hippocampus grew, and that's a positive sign that it could, the increase in the volume of that, the hippocampus would be proportionate to increases and improvement in memory as well. And the activity that we do the kinds of activities that we do are important. So in people with dementia or decline in the memory, it's important to do exercise in 3 dimensions, so to speak. So creative activity, gardening, carpentry, where there's an element of planning and thinking, and also the physical activity as well. But we should still do that, the more mundane activity that we think of, like walking, running, cycling. And the target is 30 minutes of exercise a day. Now, if you're walking, that might not get you your... No, actually, that would get you your 50,000 steps a week. I'm just trying to calculate it in my head for those who are going to be aiming for the study we heard of earlier on. So about a 45-minute walk would get you about 8,000 steps, 9,000 steps, and then, so you could make it. But that's just the minimum. So we encourage people to, if you're wanting to reverse disease, so whether it's Alzheimer's or diabetes or blood pressure, we aim for 45 to 30 minutes of moderate exercise. And moderate exercise is that where you can just about talk, but you wouldn't be able to sing if you're that active. But we shouldn't just exercise for that time. The target actually they see is for us to think of what another author, so Dr. Youngberg, I'll show you the book later, he mentions this thing called physical activity batting average. So we need to be active for, he says, about 30% of our day. That's the target. But most of us are much less active. But if we're aiming for 10 to 20%, so that's about 2.5 to 3 hours of movement. So not necessarily exercise, but just moving. So standing, walking, doing housework, that kind of thing, aiming for about 2.5 hours a day. So if you're looking at your day, think of when you can bring in those slots of activity. If you're working in a job that means you're sitting for hours, every hour go for a 5-minute walk, push-ups, go and talk to a colleague in the next room, something like that, and build that up until you're moving minimum 2.5 hours a day, in addition to those 30 minutes of more vigorous activity. And another study as well showed that people who are in the bottom 10% for daily physical activity had a 2 times higher chance of developing Alzheimer's compared to people in the top 10% of activity. It's important to have sleep for Alzheimer's and also for any other mental disorder. I was listening to a talk recently. I'm not sure if you've ever met, there's a Dr. Eric Walsh, he's an Adventist doctor in California. And he was saying sleep is one of those things that's really underrated. And that if a lot of the mental health problems going on in the world right now can actually be solved if people slept more. If we're thinking of especially young people, we've got an anxiety epidemic that's in younger people. And a lot of it is because young people and older people are not sleeping enough due to our devices, our working schedules. And when we sleep, the body goes into restorative mode. So it's not, the body doesn't shut down when you sleep. It's actually working hard. So just like in a city, when the London is shut down, we've got the street sweepers on the streets cleaning up. That's what's happening in our brain. And there's what's called the glymphatic system. It's like the lymphatic system that we have that removes toxins from our circulation. The similar thing happens in the body, in the brain as well. And that works when we're sleeping, preferably in a dark environment as well. So the aim is to get about 7 to 8 hours of sleep a night. And some studies where they've observed, people who are not sleeping enough, it does definitely affect their mental health. And even in patients with Alzheimer's, unfortunately, do struggle with sleep. But if you're more active during the day, particularly, that can actually improve your sleep later on at night. So you might not be able to get to the 8 hours straight, but try and build up slowly, and also improve the sleep environment so that you have better quality sleep. Okay. So loneliness as well is linked to an increase in your chances of getting Alzheimer's. And we know that this is another pandemic, so to speak, in our world and even in the UK as well. And people who've lived alone for all their lives, and there are people like that, almost have double the risk of dementia. And also there was a study as well about people who divorce later on in life can have this increased chance of having dementia. So to mitigate against loneliness, that's why our churches are here. I was trying to see if there's any clear studies about the link with religious activity and dementia, but there's nothing firmly conclusive. But there are studies that show that in certain populations, there's a reduced risk of mood problems and mental health problems when people are within a church community or a religious community, and also reduced mortality. So that's just general death rate as well. But definitely our churches can help us to be able to build those communities to reduce that loneliness, get us doing some of these things together and motivate us to work together as well. So that could be a benefit for us. Okay. So some of the things that, just in a kind of a brief summary, I didn't go through all of these things in detail, but just as a summary for a reminder, some of the aims of things that we need to think about in our life course that can reduce our chance of dementia. So as I said before, in maintaining your blood pressure below 130 in the middle life, so high blood pressure tends to affect people kind of 45 years and older. So if you've got blood pressure, make sure your blood pressure is controlled with medication, or you can reverse blood pressure through lifestyle, and there's different ways to do that. Improve your hearing. If you've got hearing impairment, make sure you get whatever help you can to reduce that. Reducing exposure to air pollution and smoking in particular as well. I didn't go through those things, but I thought they were quite evident. Reducing head injury, alcohol, as I mentioned, and also improving the education for young people. And also, again, reducing your obesity. So these things would happen if you are doing some of those activities we discussed about, and especially in middle to late life. And also addressing all the other risk factors that we mentioned that will put you at risk of dementia. So those are the things that we need to aim to do. And it's quite a long list. But and the other thing is there's a theory that's called the PINTAC theory. So if somebody's sitting on, let's say, 12 pins, so we say these risk factors are 12 pins, if you want to improve the pain that you have on sitting on those 12 pins, removing one pin will make a little bit of difference. But the more pins you remove, the bigger the effect you'll have. So it's the same thing with our lifestyle interventions and also some of these risk factors for dementia. Yes, we should start with small things and build it up, but we should aim as much as possible to try and do all the things so that we can get the most benefit for our health. And we can get God's help in that as well. So dementia, Alzheimer's and dementia are not normal aspects of aging. They are common, but they're not normal. But there is hope that we can improve it, and looking into the future, there is even signs that we might even be able to reverse it. So I just wanted to share some promises from the Bible. And this was a promise that we find in Psalms 19, verse 7 and 8. So it says, "The law of the Lord is perfect, reviving the soul. The testimony of the Lord is sure, making wise the simple. The statutes of the Lord are right, rejoicing the heart. The commandment of the Lord is pure, enlightening the eyes." So the word of God can revive us. It can revive our physical being, but it can revive our minds as well. And I believe that when we look at a lot of studies that are done comparing Adventists to other groups, often we focus on the physical aspects, but I really do believe that even our religiosity and the Bible and coming together, these things are actually what revive us, and God blesses us as well and protects us through reading his word. The other promise that we read about, I might not necessarily read all of it, but if you remember, there's a story in Joel. It's a story that I found quite difficult to understand, but I'm trying to understand it. But there is a plague of locusts that comes and destroys Israel because of their sins. Destroys Israel, yeah. The vegetation, that's the word, thank you, because of their sins. I think when I read this, I thought it was a parable, but it actually is a plague of locusts. And it was devastating. There was a famine that followed after that. But there's a wonderful promise there that it says, "I will restore to you the years that the swarming locust has eaten, the crawling locust, the consuming locust, the chewing locust, the great army which I sent among you." So we have got sin in our world, and some people are unfortunately going to have some memory problems, other health issues. But God does promise that he can restore what has been lost. Sometimes if we've done it through ignorance, we might have smoked, we might have drunk, we might have not been as active, or whatever it is. But if we come back to him, we can restore some of those years that we have lost. And then there's that wonderful promise that we like as Adventists, that God is going to pour out his spirit among us. And the young sons and daughters will prophesy, but even the old men will dream dreams. So older people can have active lives and active memories, and God can restore those years back to us. So finally, I just wanted to show you just a video. Now, I don't know if this is going to run. Is that going to run? I'm not sure. Oh yeah, something was happening.
Age is no barrier in serving God.
My name is Jato Mailose Sibanda. Today is my 113th birthday. I'm still actively involved in ministry. I think I'm the oldest master guy in SID.
Sorry, if it's possible. Thanks. So I should
Age is no barrier in serving God.
My name is Jato Mailose Sibanda. Today is my 113th birthday. I'm still actively involved in ministry. I think I'm the oldest master guide in SID. I'm still working full days in the field, and I spend time with God every day. I take my fitness seriously. I'm still very active on the farm, and I can even do jumping jacks. While I'm still breathing, I can serve God. I'm still an active master guide and still teach Sabbath school. Jesus is coming again. May we all be ready.
Okay, all right. So just, I hope you got the story. So just a little clip. I think this man, if you went to GC 2015, 2015. I think his video was shown there, but I found this online. So he's late now. I can't remember what age he died at, but he was an old gentleman who was very active, as you can see. And so so you can be active into your older years. If you're interested as well, on the TED YouTube page, they've just recently done a series of interviews with older people from different parts of the world, just sharing their life story, and it's worth watching that. And just the final thing, in the Bible we have an example of of a man, and I'm just going to read what he said. He said, "Now behold, the Lord has kept me alive, as he said, these 45 years, ever since the Lord spoke this word." Sorry. Oh, sorry. Apologies. I've got the wrong thing. Okay. Let me just put it up here. Oh, I'm going the wrong way. All right. Sorry. Yes, this is a quiz. Apologies. I'm one slide ahead in my head. So, So this is a statement, which was I've just forgotten the name. Yes, I know who it is. Okay. So it says, "Now behold, the Lord has kept me these 45 years, ever since the Lord spoke this word to Moses, while Israel was wandering in the wilderness. And now here I am this day, 85 years old, yet I am as strong this day as on the day that Moses sent me. Just as my strength was then, so now is my strength for war, both going out and for coming in." Who said these words? Yes, well done. Okay. All right. So Caleb was 85, and this was just before he went and conquered Hebron, I think it was. But, because there were these Amalekites, those giants that the Israelites had said, "They're going to eat us, and we're just like locusts." And when he got to the promised land, he said, "No, I'm going to finish off this project." And he went at 85 to do that. And we also have, of course, Moses, who, when he was 120 years, when he died, he says his eyes were not weak, nor his strength gone. And this is the prayer I pray for all of us, and especially our older folks as well, that God can give you the strength, and that you will have minds which remain sharp. And we pray that this might not happen for us, all of us now, but we believe that when Jesus comes, he will restore us back to our Eden selves, and we'll have that strength renewed to us. Okay, thank you very much. I hope I slowed down enough for you. Just a resource that you can use. This book is, I was going to put a picture of it on my slides, but it's a book by Wes Youngberg. He's an American lifestyle doctor, but he's not a medical doctor. I think he did dietitian and a PhD at Loma Linda. He's got a few books. You can find them at ABC, and he talks a little bit about how you can improve your memory. Just as a warning, it's very American, so they do a lot of tests that are not necessarily available here in the UK. But there are some principles that you can pick up that will really help if you want to learn more about how to improve your memory. And he has a few cases that he goes through of people who had Alzheimer's and things that they used, some of these principles to improve their quality of life while they had the illness. So thank you. All right. I'll leave that here. Okay.
Good afternoon, everyone. It's like coming home again. This used to be my church for a number of years now, and I still recognize some faces as we reconnect. Now, I'm going to ask you to do something because it's an afternoon. It's after lunch sort of slumber time. So we're all going to stand up. Come on, let's all stand up. And we're going to take a couple of deep breaths just to get the oxygen going, get us awake, because I could see that, it's a struggle to concentrate, okay? So let's just take 3 deep breaths. Come on. It's like being in school again. Okay, and just stretch. Just stretch a little bit. Come on, just do your stretches. Okay, just get that circulation going. Brilliant. Okay. Okay, thank you very much. You can have a seat now. Now, hopefully the tech team has got the slides loaded. Yeah, okay. Clicks. Yeah, brilliant. Cheers. Okay, so for the next few minutes, we're going to be talking a little bit about possibilities and your role, and we're going to frame that in the context of a few conditions which exist out there. We're going to examine how they manifest themselves, and what we're going to then look at is, what do we do? How do we relate to those in the church environment? How do families deal with them, and how do the community deal with them? Now, most of you, I'll go to slide 1. Hopefully this works. Oh. All right, okay. Okay, so you may not be able to see that much, and in fact, that's more a prompt for me, but most of you think you know what a learning disability is because you might recognize the physical symptoms of what you might term to be a disabled person. You might be aware of the specific medical condition that might define them as having a learning disability. But what precisely is a learning disability? I'm going to look at Down syndrome. I'm going to be looking at Down syndrome. We're going to be looking at autism or the autistic spectrum. We're going to be also be looking at ADHD, something that a lot of people are familiar with. And finally, we're going to finish off with something called global developmental delay. We're not going to be doing medical about it. I'm just going to be looking more at how we deal with it as a church community. But I may explain a little bit about the presentation of these conditions. Oops, we can back the wrong way. Okay, so Down's syndrome. A child who's born, or a baby who's born with Down syndrome, and this can now be diagnosed in the room, as some of you know, you can have amniocentesis test, which will define your chromosome makeup of your unborn child, and some individuals may be given the option of carrying through with the pregnancy or not. But in most cases, people choose to have their babies. It's usually a problem on chromosome 21 where there's an extra chromosome which affects either all of the cells of the individual or a majority of the cells. And it's typically characterized by some very telling syndromes, distinct sort of features. Small head, flattened face, short neck, protruding tongue, up-slanting eyes, a bit of congenital heart problems where there is usually a murmur on the heart, gastrointestinal abnormalities. There are some also blood disorders and neurological disorders in terms of coordination sometimes, and musculoskeletal disorders, which comes with slightly undeveloped parts of the body. That's as technical as I'm going to get about this. We're going to now look at a little bit about some of the things that we can do if we have such individuals in our church, in our congregation. And so the point of today is to look at how we can change our attitudes, or how we can assist, or what your role would be in making things possible for individuals with learning disabilities, Down syndrome in particular. With a child in a Down syndrome environment, issue, I would call it an issue. It's not a disease, and I want to make it very clear, these are not diseases. These are conditions which are defined, some of them, not all of them, but some of them, the majority of them, are defined during the developmental stage of the fetus, where neurons may be connecting and there may be chromosomal mistakes at fertilization, which might cause issues like this. There are also genetic trends which transmitted down the line, which can cause these issues. So they're not diseases that you can catch. You can't actually contract Down syndrome by sitting next to someone. Neither would your children pick them up if they were in a class with a Down syndrome child. But what do we do in church? Well, majority of the times, if someone, a child has got some sort of learning disability, he's coined as an unruly child. Have you ever heard that? Oh, yes. You must pray for that one more, because their behavior is not quite what we expect in church. Okay? However, if you're a Sabbath school teacher and you have children in your class that has behavioral issues, you need to find out a little bit more about what's behind the behavior of that child. So with a child with Down syndrome, where perhaps the physical presentation might tell you that it's a a child with Down syndrome, you should speak very clearly and calmly to that child. Praise them when they do something correct, for example, remembering to say thank you or please, or put something back that fell down. Praise them so that they are encouraged to do the correct thing. Okay? The second thing is be calm if indeed they get things wrong. Don't tell them off. Don't tell them they should know better, because it could be, as you heard the previous speaker, cognitively their development may not be the same as other children. In fact, in most cases they're not. Play, sing songs, and read books to them. So do active things that would encourage them to participate. Okay? Show them how to do things rather than giving them instructions. So if you want them to do something in Sabbath school, if you want them to make a little picture collage, show them how to do it rather than giving them instructions. They won't retain the sequence of how to do things. And if you do have to give instructions, 1 or 2 steps at a time, not complex things. A typical example with some of my staff in one of the units that we have is if you're teaching someone to make a hot drink, you give them 2 steps at a time, not the whole from getting the cup out of the cupboard, getting the material for the drink, putting the hot water on the kettle, and then actually what you put in there, waiting for it to cool, the right time to drink. That's too much. That's too complicated, even for teenagers with Down syndrome or who may have some sort of cognitive impairment. You do 2 steps at a time. That's all that they can retain. And so in Sabbath school, we need to look at, in our church community, adopting some of that. Some of you must have heard of PECS, which is a pictorial sort of method of communicating. Of course, you've heard of Macton, which is a sort of specialized branch of BSL, which you're seeing here, and sing-along exercises. Those all help with communicating with the child and making them feel at home. One of the reasons for behaviors that may seem to be unacceptable is where there's a breakdown in communication. They don't know what's going on. They can't participate. They can't interact with you because they're being left behind in the Sabbath school class. And so we have behaviors that then you say, that child is unruly because they want attention and you're not picking up. You're not communicating with them. Another aspect of this is that we should not talk down to people with Down syndrome. Don't speak down to them as though they don't understand. People tend to, even with individuals with who are a little bit older and are slightly hard of hearing, do you notice that sometimes people start raising their voice at them as though they don't understand, and you speak to them and you start speaking to them in a certain way as though they don't understand? We tend to do that, assuming that the person can't comprehend. What we should do then is talk both the parents and carers, those who know them directly, intimately, and find out how do they communicate. I dare say, if I ask this congregation, if I put you into a church community in northern Siberia, where they speak a dialect which you don't understand, we will all appear as though we've got learning disabilities. We won't understand what they're saying. We won't be able to respond appropriately. We won't be able to, follow instructions because we don't understand it. And that is what's happening with some of our individuals with this sort of issue. So here, we should not use outdated methods. For example, language such as handicapped, backward, or saying that someone with Down syndrome has an illness. As I explained before, it is not an illness. It's a condition which is either inherited through genetic faults or genetic extra genes being manifested on the chromosomes, or it may be something that happens during fertilization where we have some crossing over and sometimes we have some mistakes being done at that point in the genes coming together. I'll take some questions later on. I want to move on to something that is a little bit more at home and you may be familiar with, is attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, ADHD. Very common and something that is used sometimes to describe children who are, you say they're hyper or they're hyperactive. Attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, ADHD, as the abbreviation is used. It's a condition that affects people's behavior. People with ADHD can seem restless, may have trouble concentrating, and may act impulsively. I guess you may know a child or you may know someone who may behave like that. The symptoms of ADHD usually improve with age. However, in some adults, you can still see that tendency. So what should we do with such conditions in the church situation? Well, there are two basic principles for dealing with someone or an individual with ADHD. Firstly, encourage and reward good behavior, positive reinforcement. Those of you who are into looking after anyone with learning disabilities, you use positive reinforcement. So something that's good, you actually reward them for doing the good. And then when there's behavior that is not acceptable, you use what's called negative reinforcement. You either remove the rewards or you don't award any reward. And you then, they then learn that a negative behavior doesn't elicit any good outcomes. So this is looking at consequences now. So for these individuals, they may not be able to understand the rationale for behaving good, but they understand the consequence of not behaving good. And so you work with that. Again, in our Sabbath school class, this is what we should be doing. Reward those who can sit through the class for a good time without getting up and fidgeting too much. Reward that. Just small little tokens of rewards during Sabbath school session, and you will find there's an improvement. Work with the parents and be consistent with the rewards. Don't give a different reward. Now, what we often find is that people might be rewarding the wrong thing. So when a child behaves bad, you give them something nice, so they'll stop the bad behavior. What do you think that does? If I behave bad, I'll get more of the good thing. So you don't do it that way. Yeah? So when someone behaves badly, you don't reward it. If you end up rewarding it, then you're making a rod for your back. They will behave bad to get what they want. Think of the 2-year-old who starts throwing a tantrum in the supermarket because he can't get the sweets. If you give in, that's it. Okay, so exactly, that's the same thing that happens here with ADHD in terms of the principles that should be used. Again, in the church environment, there's a couple of pointers here. Have rewards ready to be given for good behavior. Ensure that you observe carefully when the behavior is very good and praise them. One of the things that encourages good behavior is praise, and that goes for individuals who don't even have a sort of disability of any sort. For normal individuals, we all respond to good, so praise when people recognize we've done something good. And so with these individuals, it's critical that we do so. Again, removing tangible rewards. Do not label the child as a difficult child. Again, I'm emphasizing this because I've heard people get down on their knees and pray about children, calling them difficult children and various other things. This is not really the method. The method is to find something good to say about that child. If we're going to ask God to bless, God has allowed, and let me say this, with all individuals, whatever defects they have, God has allowed that person to come into this world. God has a plan for that person. It's up to us to discover what that plan is and be part of that journey. Continuing with ADHD in church, do not sweat about details. Be willing for some compromises. So sometimes people are so precise themselves, they just want things done just so. And if the child doesn't do it that way, something is wrong. With children with ADHD, if they're going in the right direction, encourage them. They will not be precise. But if they're in the right area in terms of their behavior or heading in the right direction, recognize that. Okay, so don't get overwhelmed if they lash out or are physically aggressive. Sometimes that's because they don't understand what's going on. Bring them back to an understanding. Don't be negative. So even if someone lashes out, make sure that you can actually get them back in a calm way. Otherwise, you're joining them. You're just becoming reactive. And they are then dictating your responses rather than you being in control. Okay, so that's ADHD and some general tips if you're a Sabbath school teacher. I'm going to now look at autism. This one is a little bit more, let's go back to the previous slides. Okay. So autism, and again, you may not be able to see the slide, the graphics on the right-hand side, but autism or the autistic spectrum disorder, ASD, is a developmental disability caused by differences in the brain, and this is differences in the way in which the brain operates. People with ASD often have problem with social communication and interaction and have restricted or repetitive behavior or interest. So people with autism has, generally speaking, they have a narrower spectrum of interest. So you may find that someone with autism, if you have a bookshelf of books and you remove one book from one of the rows, that person with autism can tell you which book was removed, but you and I won't be able to tell because their brains focus on patterns. And so they can actually recognize patterns. You may also have individuals who can memorize. We have a client who can memorize all the stations on the underground. He will reel them off on every line because he knows, and I think there are about 236 stations or so on all the networks. He can actually recite all of them for each of the lines. And so they have abilities, and this is where we talk about possibilities, to do things that you and I can't do because their brain is more focused and some aspects of their brain are more developed. They can become very creative, very good. Some of the most talented musicians in the globe are autistic. Some of the most talented composers are autistic. And so autism is not a condition that condemns you to not being productive. So here's an acronym for autism: always unique, totally intelligent, and sometimes mysterious. And it's a positive way of looking at autism. And so children with autism or individuals with autism, it can take you through your life. For a church community, we have to think outside of the box in dealing with them. We can't be doing the same things that we do and expect them to conform. So have some awareness of the condition. Be aware of those individuals who are autistic. Be aware of their patterns. Be aware of what they like. Again, in the church community, trust is something that's very important with an autistic child. They will not engage with you in any meaningful way unless they can trust you. And trusting means understanding some of their narrow sort of behaviors and being open-minded about how you can support them. So rather than coming with preconceived ideas of how you're going to do things, learn about that person. Okay? My illustration is like this. If you have a 25-story building and you have someone who has got no legs, okay? Do you change the person with no legs so that he can get up the building? Do you give him false legs and various other things so he can get up the building? Or do you make the building more friendly so he can go up in his condition? Okay? You're going to actually make the environment more conducive to his condition. And so in church, we need to think about how we're going to engage with such individuals rather than expecting them to change. Trust. The other thing is, as I mentioned before, they recognize patterns, they're into patterns. So again, learn about those structures that they can recognize and work with. Sudden changes are not good for people with autism. If you change the schedule, they will have a meltdown. Those of you who have worked with children or got anyone in the family, or maybe may have children themselves who are autistic, if you say to them you're going to do something at 10 o'clock, and 10 o'clock comes and they recognize the time and you're doing something else, that's a disaster for them. It's a total disaster. And so you need to be aware of that. Change in routines are not good. The other thing is that they do operate with routines much better. That is, knowing what to do next and having a routine, explaining. So if you're going on an outing, you do it the day before. You explain to them, okay, we're going to go on an outing. This is what we're going to do. We're going to get the bus, or we're going to drive. We're going to take some lunch. Here is where we're going to go. They can deal with that. If you then spring some sort of surprise or deviate from that, it can cause issues. So in our church environment, it's important that we understand these concepts to be a successful possibility, your role to be successful with creating possibilities for such individuals. Finally, I want to look at global developmental delay. It's a term that's used to cover a multitude of developmental issues that are normally diagnosed in children, but can affect you into adulthood and certainly affect your life. There are several areas that it affects. I've actually looked at 4 key areas here. Motor skills. This is the motor skills that develop, and the developmental checks that are done at age staging when a child is developed from age 5 to age from 1 year or 6 months right up in terms of motor skills, the ability to do things. Design activities for their level, and they tend to be, it's kind of difficult because the level of development is a little bit let's say, not as developed as it should be for the age. You also have speech and language issues, so in terms of looking at pronunciation, sometimes pronunciation is not clear, and the grasp or the range of vocabulary could be limited. You also have cognitive impairment or cognitive skills, that is the ability to compute or think through or work through things. Sometimes it just does not happen because the connections in the brain are not working as they should. And you also have social and emotional skill issue because of the communication problems. Engaging with new situations with different levels, as you and I might do, can become a challenge. Now, if you understand that, you may be able to use your role to improve the possibility for such individuals. So what do we do with someone with global developmental delay in our church situation? So with GDD as the abbreviation for it, for our church, we should look at interactive engagement. So with children or individuals who have GDD, you need to interact with them constantly so that they can understand what's going on. Rather than explaining, you need to interact. You need to eye contact. You need to get feedback from them if they're following you. You need to actually check all the time whether the communication is correct. Don't assume. If you do, then you will lose them or leave them behind. The other thing is you need to design activities for their level. In the Sabbath school class, in the adult setting, if you have someone, and let me say this, we become unsympathetic more so to people who have global developmental delay in their adulthood. We think they're slow, they're being whatever, and we don't accommodate them as much as we do with children. It's equally important for us to recognize adults in our setting who have global developmental delay and adjust for those. That's a sad sort of shortcoming in our church. And I've met many situations where someone will say, well, something's not quite right with that person, they got a penny short or something like that. You know, we describe them in terms that are kind of derogatory, perhaps not strongly derogatory, but it's almost, well, you know, they're not one of us. Something's not right with them. Rather than taking time, how can I help that person with their communication? How can I, in a sense, make up for the gap that I might have observed? That's what we should be doing. We should have specific rewards and motivational activities for children in particular, and we should reduce the amount of information that we give them at any one given time so that they can cope with small chunks of information. And here, I would like to suggest here, and this is quite radical, in our Sabbath school, whilst we don't want to have a class that we categorize as the slow class or anything like that, it might be useful if we have several individuals in our churches who've got conditions in this spectrum of conditions that I'm describing, that we look at Sabbath school classes that can deal with those, or that the Sabbath school classes are sensitized to the needs of those individuals, so they are sitting in a normal Sabbath school class, and that when they have a point to make, or if we want them to participate, we allow for their condition. We don't do that at the moment. Sometimes the Sabbath school gets so technical that even I get a little bit, sort of left behind. So in a sense, we need to allow for those things. So, what happened in biblical times? Were there individuals who had challenges, and how did they deal with them? Well, in the Bible, there are several examples of individuals who had some form of impairment. It wasn't as technical at the time. There weren't the tools to coin ADHD, Down syndrome, ASD, or global developmental delay. But there were individuals who had to live with conditions and function normally, and God still used them. Isaac, who was blind in his later years, was still used to bless the nation that was to follow, which was the nation of Israel. And he is very much coming down from Abraham, Isaac, through Jacob and Esau, but more so through Jacob was the lineage through which Jesus came, a blind man who, although was taken advantage of by his own wife and son, and I have to say Mrs. Isaac was complicit in the deception, the fact is that God still used him to bless. And I want us to hold on to that, because God has allowed those with disabilities to be amongst us so he can use them to bless. There may be challenges, but he also uses them for us to develop our patience. He takes us through situations and he sustains us through those situations. So that if we are blessed with a child who has a form of disability, God is taking you through that experience to prepare you for a greater thing. We must not despair when that happens. It may not be easy at the time, but so it is. Jacob had a limp, as you know. He struggled with an angel after that dream he had, and since then, his hip was dislocated. It looks as though the ligaments or something just went, but he limped and he walked with a stick. But God still used him. Okay, God still has use for them. Cushim was hard of hearing. He was the son of Dan and a grandson of Jacob. He couldn't hear very well. God still used him. Moses had a stutter. Remember, Moses went to the University of Egypt, so he should be very well versed, but he had a stutter and he wasn't very confident in his speech. You can find that in Exodus chapter 10. Samson, well, there are some rumors that said he was born with a limp, but we know that he died blind because his eyes was put out by the Philistines. But yet when he called on God in his blind state and in his despair, God still heard him. So what I'm saying here is that your condition does not stop your communication with God. Whether you can see, whether you can hear, whether you can speak, God will actually interpret your message for you. It's our role to facilitate and encourage. Ehud had a shriveled hand, and those of you know the story in the book of Judges where the king and everyone knew that his right hand was paralyzed, and so they said, okay, well, he's not in danger. He snuck into that wicked king's chamber, hid a sword under his coat, and was able to use the sword to kill the king, because the guards thought, he's all right. Now, what we're saying here is that that was God's plan to destroy the king, and so God used him, although he had a shriveled arm, to destroy a wicked king. Finally, you all know the story of Mephibosheth, who had a crippled leg when his nurse dropped him, trying to sort of escape. And again, God used him mightily in his life. So in summary, I want to say here that our place in church, the journey that God takes us through, be it a parent, firstly, be it a member of the church, or a member of the wider society, or if your profession takes you in that path where you are in touch or you've got some influence over people with some form of disability, it is God's plan that you, in your role, make it a possibility for them by doing what you should do. In Leviticus chapter 19, verse 14, it says, "You shall not curse the deaf or put a stumbling block before the blind, but you shall fear the God. I am the Lord." In Exodus chapter 4:11, the Lord said, "So the Lord said to him, who has made man's mouth, or who makes the mute, the deaf, the seeing, or the blind? Have I not the Lord?" So God is saying, I have also created or allowed these individuals with these limitations to come into existence, and I have determined that they will be part of your society. Therefore, it's your role. It's your role to create possibilities. A couple of quotes here, and this was from the one on the left. Disability is a matter of perception. If you can't see the italics writing, if you can do just one thing well, you're needed by someone. That was uttered by Martina Navratilova, former tennis champion, who aligned herself with helping people with disabilities as part of her charitable work. On the other hand, from the point of view of the disabled person or person with disability, the struggle you're in today is developing the strength you need tomorrow. So although someone may be struggling with something today, they can be optimistic with looking at how strong they'll be tomorrow. And finally, the person with a disability don't need to be made easy. They just need a possibility. Thank you very much.
Sorry, yeah. First of all, I just want to say, like, GDD I've never heard about.
Mhm.
So I'd like to, if you could give us a bit more information regarding that, whether it starts from young, and you said something about adults having it as well. So if you could elaborate on that a bit. Also, not to be derogatory, but the examples that you use from the Bible regarding disabilities do not compare to what GDD, ASD, and autism in any way, shape, or form. Those are like having a bad hand or a bad leg. Those are not disabilities on the same level. So I would suggest that you use examples which are, if there are examples in the Bible of that. Also, the last thing I'd say is just, I don't think people have children with disabilities because there's something greater for them to go into. I think they have those children and they can become better people from a result of how they treat those children. I don't think there's anything more than just treating them in the correct manner for their development, their own singular development. I don't think there's any greater glory to be gathered from it. And also, I don't think God has put disabled people on the earth at all. That's nothing to do with God, but God will use the bad. God, through the bad, good can come. But that's not because of God's plan in any way, shape, or form.
Okay, thanks for that. So the first question about the people with learning disabilities in the Bible, no, in Bible time they didn't have the means to determine and come out with some of these. What was possible then was the physical sort of recognition. So if you look at Jesus' time when he was healing individuals who were crippled or who were blind, those were what could have been done at the time. We don't have biblical examples of individuals with ASD or with any form of global developmental delay. You won't find those in the Bible at all. The only thing we can do is take the general principle. And the principle for Jesus is that Jesus did not ignore those with a disability. That's the principle we're taking here forward. And that's perhaps I didn't make as clear. But the principle is when Jesus came across someone who had any sort of what I'll call challenge or physical challenge or so, he did not ignore them, and neither should we. The second point that we're talking about in terms of global developmental delay, just to answer that a little bit, and some of you may not have heard about it, it's something that's only recognized when is anyone a midwife here? No? Okay, so when you're doing when you're doing your developmental check, your stage developmental check, when a child is developing, those who you look at a certain age, so from 6 months, a year, 18 months, 2 years, you know what that child should be doing. So, for example, eye contact, responding to music, things like looking at putting things together. So what happens is that you do a test to look at, for example, you get colored balls and you want them to put them into a basket, and you look at the coordination, and sometimes you then can pick up that they're not coordinating things as well. You may want them to follow your movement, and they may lose where they're going. So you can also pick up some visual issues there. So those are developmental checks. Now, we don't pick those up until we do those checks because you can't go into the brain at birth, although you may be able to pick up at birth. Those of you who've had children, you know there's something called the APGAR score at birth. And if the APGAR score is low or high, APGAR, A-P-G-A-R, the APGAR score, which is the time that the baby takes to fully oxygenate from birth. So you've heard of blue babies. The babies take a little bit long time. Okay, so you may have heard of those. That might have a bearing on early oxygenation of the brain and can play a part in some of what we're talking about today. More common in forceps delivery sometimes, because in forceps delivery, there's a delay sometimes in the baby coming through the birth canal. You have to use forceps. You then have to compress the brain as you get the baby out. sometimes you get some issues happening there. So there are some physical conditions that might cause the global developmental delay that we can put our fingers on. Other than that, it's more to do with connections in the neurons. And let me say this, during the latter stage of pregnancy, in the human brain, there's something like 90,000 neuron connections being made every minute. So if you multiply that 24 hours, the billions of neuronal connections that are being made in the latter stage of pregnancy in terms of the number of neurons in our brain, and sometimes there are some misconnections or they are not connected as they should. And that plays a part in autism, global developmental delay, and a lot of our learning disabilities. We can't actually put our fingers, we don't know when it's going to happen sometimes, but we can pick up the signs and symptoms later on, usually by age 5. If you're born with it, it has a feature throughout your adult life. You are a little bit behind in terms of learning. Some people can actually, the brain is very clever. It can rewire itself, and sometimes learning can be accelerated. Or you might have, individuals who are not very academic. They're very good with hands. They can do things very hand, but give them something to do academically. Read something and sit down and do it. Just not them. Those conditions can affect all of adulthood, and you may come across individuals like that. It doesn't mean to say that they can't play a part in society, but you will see that sort of manifestation in adulthood. GDD is just a specific learning disability. The term learning disability covers a multitude of conditions. More than, I'd say, in my sort of experience, the term learning disability can cover over 100 different conditions. It's not just one. So you have someone who's got on the autistic spectrum has a learning disability. Someone who has Down syndrome has a learning disability, can affect their cognitive processing. GDD, ASD, all of those can, although ASD now, we've moved it away out of the learning disability definition. I'm not sure you're aware of that. ADHD is now removed. It's now no longer considered a learning disability. ADHD. It's now considered a behavioral issue because through negative and positive reinforcement and something called behavior management modification, you can correct a lot of that. Yeah.
Do you find it covers a lot of naughty children? Do you find it covers a lot of naughty children?
Those who coin the children as naughty, we don't use it. Well, I wouldn't use that term. I would say they have behavioral challenges, and because naughty tends to assume that they have full control of what they're doing, and they're deliberately disregarding their parents or adult guidance. And sometimes that's not the case. The impulsiveness, the way they see the world is different from you and I. And so, generally speaking, if they see something and they want to go for it, that's it. They may not understand, for example, if you say to them, using the word no is something that we advise professionals not to do. You don't use the word no, because no is non-negotiable. If you think about the word no, if you say no, there's no room for negotiation, okay? So what you would say, you would actually use a different term. You would give them options. You don't say no. You say you can do this or you can do that. You don't say no. Yeah.
Hold on a second, please. Hold on, Michelle. Let's just all of us hear it.
I was just going to say, what happened in my grandparents' time? Men has increased in knowledge, and you categorized it, but no was no in my day, and it didn't really harm me. I don't remember any children around me that when no was no. So now we have this terminology. It covers a lot of multitude of naughtiness. I'm not saying it doesn't exist. I know children who are, but sometimes we tend to let them slip into things because this AHD is there to diagnose what can be said. Mommy can't say no. Mommy has to negotiate what she wants to tell me. I find it hard to comprehend.
Yes, and I can appreciate some people find it hard to do that, but you have to be sure that that child has ADHD as opposed to a child who's just wanting to have their own way. So I take on board what you say here. It's not meaning that parents shouldn't be firm when guiding children, but if you have a child that you know has ADHD, it doesn't matter how much you shout at that child, it won't change. You've got to find a method of reinforcing good behavior. And as you say, growing up, and when I was growing up as well, this was what was missing. From where I came, they would say that child was a dunce child, and they would put them at the back of the class. They were made fun of in the class. The teachers didn't take time to help that child. And so we have special needs schools now, but in my time, they didn't have special needs school. That child was just slow. They were excluded, they were marginalized, they weren't given opportunities. Today we know different, and we can give people greater opportunities. Any more questions?
Thank you. I just have a short question. On the autism spectrum, how much different types are there?
Okay, go on.
And it seems pretty close to some of the learning disabilities. I think, based on what you were saying, it's kind of hard to. Anyways, the first one is just what different types, how many different types there are.
Okay, on the autistic spectrum, remember the reason why it's now revised, you used to say someone is autistic, and that was it. The reason why it's now classed as a spectrum, there are different degrees of autism. So you can be, and in the general classification, there's level 1, level 2, and level 3. Okay, level 1, this is where a person requires support. They've got trouble understanding the following social rules. They are rigid or inflexible in their behavior. They exercise or experience stress in transition. That is, if you have changes, they become stressed. So if you say to them, okay, we're taking this route to go to school, but today we're going to a different route, it will cause them stress. They'll start worrying. They may benefit from therapy or life skills coaching. So you give them life skills coaching to deal with everyday life, and those individuals can benefit from that. So that's level 1. Level 2 requires substantial support. This is where the behavior is very kind of dismissive. So, for example, you're talking to someone on a level 2 autistic spectrum, they'll walk away from you, just ignore you. Okay? So midway through the conversation, they've had enough. That's it. They just turn their back and they're off. And you wonder what's going on. Okay? They've got a high interest in specific topics, and I described some of those. They're patterns. They may be very good musically. They may even be good at art and design. Very highly specialized in their interests. Okay, level 2, again, continuing. You will notice the distress on their faces as they become distressed. It's visible on a level 2. On a level 1, you won't see it so much, but on a level 2, you will see it because it's quite sort of close to how they see the world. And finally, on the level 2, they may need school accommodation, like in terms of specialized school accommodation to help them read, because they may have the ability to read, but they may not do so with the normal text that we have or the normal tools that we have. So they need specialized tools to help them read. There is some potential there, but the very distinct thing with those individuals, they appear to be cold. Talking to them, no facial expression, they'll just walk away. That's it. Okay? Level 3 now, this is one that you may be more familiar with, very severe communication difficulties. May not have speech, can't speak. So the deficits are quite large. They may understand what you say to them, but they can't because the language center in the brain hasn't developed. They've got repetitive behavior. They may be, you may see them, and you may see individuals, they may be standing and they'll be rocking back and forth like that, okay, all the time, okay? You'd see individuals like that, and I'm sure you've come across, those are the typical ones that people recognize, repetitive behaviors. They may be clapping their hands like that for no reason, and you think, what are they clapping about? People with autism, level 3, okay? Extreme distress when switching tasks. And these are the ones where I was saying, if you switch things, they have a meltdown. And when I say a meltdown, it can last for hours. Yeah, they can become distressed and it will last for hours. Okay? And the other one, they may need one-to-one time with the educational assistant or the school assistant in special needs school, and may use what's called augmentative and alternative communication tools. Here is where we're using symbols, we're using, and some of these individuals make up their own symbols. So basically they can't even adopt Makaton or PECs, but they have their own way of communicating. So if they want to go to the toilet, they will have their own way of letting you know, and you have to learn that. If they're feeling hungry, they will have their own way of letting you know, despite the fact that they can't speak. You've got to learn that. And so parents will learn that if you have a child observing very carefully. That's shared with school. School will learn that. That's shared with other carers. And so individuals who are severely autistic have severe communication problems, and therefore you've got to get to know them. So those are the differences. Let me summarize. Level 1, an individual has trouble understanding social rules. They may be rigid and inflexible. They may become stressed, but they can benefit from some therapy and coaching. Level 2, they require substantial support. They do have a high level of distress. You can see that visually when you're talking to them. If you change plans, they may need special reading skills. They may have the potential to learn to read, but may need special tools to do so. Level 3, severe communication difficulties. No language whatsoever, okay? So they will use gestures. They would use their own language, sort of communication skills to let you know things about them, and they will need specific tuition or go to special needs school just to learn the basics. You may not be able to get further than the basics of everyday life. Question? Microphone, please. Okay.
It's interesting about that some of the children that we classify as being naughty. It's good that neuroscientists are now connecting that sometimes the child's brain is not wired up in the way we think it is.
Yes.
You give them an instruction and they don't obey you because they don't understand. And it doesn't matter what you do, they will just stay there and stare because they cannot process what happens next. Mm-hmm. So when we understand that that's the child's problem, we'll be more sympathetic and look at strategies we can use to help the child and help us to understand the child.
Absolutely.
Otherwise, they have a complete meltdown. They say no, and they kick the table over,
yes.
And there's no control in their behavior until they really understand and are ready to process. Nothing to do with whether this child is naughty or not. It's just the way the brain is wired up for this child in the condition that he or she has.
Yes. And I dare say, if you take a normal individual, and as I say, put them in an environment where they don't understand, if you get in an environment where you don't understand what's going on, and someone is giving you instructions and you don't understand it, you will become distressed as well. You may not kick over the table, but you will become distressed.
Hi. I just wanted to address Neil's question about GDD. You've seen GDD, and if I make it visual for you, you've seen Hannah.
Yeah.
And Hannah has GDD, Global Development Delay. But I do want to add a level 5, because I don't really feel that Hannah's type of disability has been mentioned today. with respect. Is that okay?
Mm-hmm. Go ahead.
Hannah has global delay, which means she cannot talk, as Anslim mentioned before, but she cannot create her own communication style. So in order to understand her, it's a process of elimination, trying to determine if she's crying, maybe the pain's here and you're touching, trying to determine what the problem is because she cannot communicate. Sorry, for those of you who do not know Hannah, Hannah's my daughter. She's 14 and she has global developmental delay. She doesn't walk, so basically she is totally and fully dependent on an adult for all her needs, whatever it is, which means for us, our entire house has to be adapted. Just this week we had to have another ramp put on at the back of our house just to get her into the garden.
Is there a spectrum of GDD as well then? Because Hannah, she's at a certain level, not all GDD like that.
No, and that's why I've come in to say I wanted, because Anslim went.
No, so I'm talking about autism, but you're talking about GDD.
Yeah,
so let's
GDD. So Hannah has global developmental delay, and I would put her probably at the maximum scenario in that she cannot do anything for herself. And I wanted to bring it in because I wanted to talk about the church, because I liked how you linked it into the church. For us, I was mentioning to Marlene this morning, we don't really have that type of access to church with regard to, I mean, I could have brought Hannah here today. It's a Disabilities Day, and she's disabled. But if I brought her here, I would have no access to change her. She's fully in pads. So there would be no way for me to lift her because there's no hoisting. We have a disability room, but it's not fit for purpose with regards to anybody like Hannah. It is more of a baby changing area, but it's not a change in places, meaning it has no hoist. I couldn't lift her, I couldn't change her, which means she would have no access. We couldn't bring her. Many people always ask for Hannah because they haven't seen her for years, but I cannot bring her to church, not just here, most any church really, because church does not, is not equipped to meet. They can be equipped, but they haven't produced changing rooms in our changing places, which means that a high-low bench, not a baby bench, a big bench that will accommodate a baby and an adult, and a hoist which can lift her up. And if we have something like that, we talk about how does the church meet the needs of the community. Changing Places is registered on a list globally, which means if Changing Places, which is a fully equipped disabled room, is put in the church, the nation knows about it and people will come. Wilson is a church that does a lot for the community, and this is a way that we can access to the community. So, sorry, you're talking about autism, but GDD is something that Hannah has, and I know that Neil knows Hannah, and she's a child that cannot do anything at all for herself. And so it would be nice if our churches are equipped to meet the needs of children like Hannah.
It is something that we're lacking in terms of knowing our membership and meeting the needs of some of the individuals in our congregation. Not all churches will be able to do it because it's quite a costly thing, but together I think one could look at it. In the extreme cases, and I'll just say to you that I've got two therapeutic centres with children with severe learning disabilities. We have ceiling hoists. There's a hoist on the ceiling to wheel them into their bathroom, over their bed. It takes them straight from over their bed, wheel into their bathroom with a ceiling hoist and back in because they're quadriplegic. None of the limbs work. So we can, and I didn't want to go into all those severe ones, but Sherelle's daughter, who I've met, is very severe, and you may not see such individuals very often in church because our church just can't cater for those individuals. But on the lower spectrum of GDD, you will meet such individuals in church, even some adults. And when we don't know that they've got GDD, we may we may use what I will call not just mild, but derogatory terms to describe such individuals as slow, as a little bit silly, or not quite right up here. And I've heard those terms used for individuals very often. And it's not very good because we don't know the history. And that's where we sometimes fall short greatly. Question? Yes?
Yes, thank you. It's a question for Dr. Nomsa.
Yeah.
And it was in reference to dementia. There's a lot of information flying around that dementia is now being called or being referred to as the new type 3 diabetes. Is there any information do you have to expound and help us as a community to understand?
Hi. Yeah, so I think I'd shown it briefly on the slides. Yeah, so maybe just to go back. So because we've got lots of what we call these metabolic illnesses, so diabetes, high blood pressure, high cholesterol, obesity, there's some trends that are showing that people with these conditions seem to also have a higher chance of having Alzheimer's disease. And when you look at some of the brain changes that happen in Alzheimer's, for example, I think I mentioned in one of the slides that one of the proteins that accumulates in the brain, in the center of that or associated with that are cholesterol crystals. So when you've got high cholesterol, you also seem to have increased of Alzheimer's. And then insulin resistance, which is maybe the hallmark of type 2 diabetes, so where the cells, when your blood glucose levels are high, the cells are not, they're not admitting the glucose into the cell as they should be. So this is not just your pancreas, but other cells like the muscle, but we're also seeing that it's happening in the brain as well. So instead of glucose entering the cells, the glucose is swimming around the cells and then causing damage in the same way glucose damages other parts of the body. And if this is happening in the brain, then you get problems in the nerve cells and then consequently cognitive dysfunction and Alzheimer's. So there is that idea that it's a type 3, but it's not an official phrase. I think it's just more a picture, kind of I can't think of the word, but it's a way for us to understand some of the mechanisms a bit better. And in saying that, then, that shows that just like we can reverse aspects of diabetes and cholesterol and high blood pressure, could it be that we can reverse some of the aspects of Alzheimer's? So these are the questions that we're asking, and there are signs that that is possible to reverse or mitigate and prevent Alzheimer's. I hope that makes sense. Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
Okay, thank you both. Just a comment, really. I don't know how this was planned, but I think it's quite important because you've touched on two conditions that affect people from the cradle to the grave. And very interestingly, with one of them, the ones Anslim has been talking about, you're not prepared for it as a parent, it just happens. And then Nomsa, you're talking about things that happen gradually over time. So gradually over time, you can see is the dementia rates are quite high. You can see it coming. And there are things that you can do to mitigate those circumstances, even though you may not be able to remove most of them. But then for one group of people like Cheryl here, you just have it. So genes, whether you could say a case of fate, or whether genes have, this is what you have, and you just have to deal with it. But I'm glad, that no matter what you are given, God will still give you the grace to deal with it. Okay, because it's not something that you prepare for, because every person is expecting a healthy child with full faculties, but you just get it, you just go on with it. And then for the older people, it's something that we see is coming, and again, God has given you the grace that you can mitigate. So what he's saying to people is, as probably both of you are saying, is that the genes you get are what you get. you cannot do anything about that. But there are lifestyle issues that you can do, which can help you with some conditions, some you cannot. So I think this is quite important. So I want to just thank you for highlighting this, for the church. And then lastly, Nomsa, you mentioned this verse from Joel chapter 2, which is quite important. That even though some of us would have made wrong choices in our lifestyles, but the verse says that God can restore what, the bad lifestyle that you've done. So we're saying to people, even though, the doctors may say this is the way you're going to go because of your choices, this is what's going to happen, but there is so space for God to intervene, but not saying that we must not do the things that we need to do to prevent those things from, becoming worse. So thank you for touching both aspects of, the cradle, to the grave. Yeah.
Thanks. Yeah.
And just to add to that comment, for some of you who don't know, whenever the majority of unborn children with learning disabilities, you have a miscarriage, and often the pathology shows that child would have had a learning disability, or there's some malfunction or maldevelopment of the brain. So nature's way of, in a sense, sometimes dealing with some of these issues is that you do have a miscarriage, and very often people have miscarriages, and the fetus then, once we go to the labs, find that there was some maldevelopment in the brain. So in a sense, this is why my point here about God allowing someone to come into the world with that. And that's backed up back in Leviticus, where God was recognizing people who were born deaf, people who were mute, etc. And I would imagine someone who was mute could be autistic. So that's, but it doesn't identify who was mute as such. But it does say back then there were people who were deaf, blind, and muted, and therefore they were part of society then, and the attitude or the principle that he gave instructions to Moses, to the Israelites, on how to deal with those individuals should follow today.
Thank you both so very much. You can stand there for a moment. Sister Phillips is going to come and do the thank yous. I want to personally thank you. And especially the way that you linked it, I'm sorry, wrong place, the way that you linked it to the church, and in particular Sabbath school, because we have lots of young children who are suffering at school because of this diagnosis, or not being given this diagnosis, and trying to navigate their way through, and then they come to church and they receive the exact same type of attitude. Worse. Absolutely. And I know it might be difficult, because if you're like me, you're old. You were brought up a very different way. And as the lady over there was saying, sister over there was saying, it didn't do any harm. And I'm thinking, it did me harm. But it didn't mean that I didn't repeat some of those same behavior. So I want to thank you for just kind of highlighting that, because I think it's really important. As it is when we're choosing people to head these departments or to do these different roles, and we don't know anything about learning styles, and we're expecting people to do all these great and wonderful things, but for God's grace and mercy, really, that he gives us some idea that we can channel with. So thank you very much. I'd like to see your diary, because you may have to come back for me. Dr. Nomsa, thank you so much. I wanted to ask a question, which was about foods and dementia. Things like coconut oil, things like basil and stuff like that, because now I'm using basil because I'm forgetting my middle name. No, I'm joking. Who was that saying what? But you know what I mean. It's taken me longer to bring the word forward. I think. So is there some kind of truth, research about basil and things like that? Is that too much a question?
Right, yeah, so I wouldn't know specifically, and I didn't go out looking for specific herbs, but I think the general principle is there that, like, basil would be one of your kind of green leafy vegetables. So the more of that you have, and add in your food, your salads. All of the chlorophyll, for example, chlorophyll is an antioxidant, which is what makes things green. So I think basil's a good ingredient to add. I think the key thing when we're looking at general health, often in science, people read something. So there's a common study where people looked at plant foods, so like carrots and some of the greens. They have got an ingredient called beta-carotene. And everyone thought, oh wow, this is amazing. So they extracted the beta-carotene and then they've been giving it as a supplement. And now it's being found that actually, as a supplement on its own, it can be harmful to the liver, to the lungs. But if you eat those vegetables and those greens, you have the benefit because it comes in a package. So that's the same thing as well as with oils. So oils we need to consider oils as being extracts. They're quite high in calories, and they might not behave the same way they would if they were in the package as the coconut or as the almonds or as the olives. So in general, I don't know anything. I wouldn't know specific. I know there's studies about. Is it I can't remember. Not basil. I'm thinking about oil. The substance in coconut oil, medium chain fatty acids, and things like that, which might be helpful. But I think there are some people are saying we need to be a bit cautious because of the heart effects of coconut oil. It is a saturated, although it's plant, but it is considered a saturated fat rather than a non-saturated, like things like olive oils. So I don't know the specifics, but I think it's better to increase the whole food rather than focusing on a single element.
Yeah, just to add to that, in some products, you have something called bioavailability, and that is the amount, and even in medicines as well, the bioavailability of a substance depends on how easily it's absorbed into the system once given in the form that's given. Now, when we eat natural foods, there are other products, as Dr. Nomsa was saying, that comes as a package that enables it to be pulled into the cells safely and excreted and detoxified in the liver safely, with a few exceptions. There are still some toxic natural substances out there that are not good for us. And therefore, when you extract them in concentrated forms, the liver now has to break down that substance to excrete it. Now, you will find that there are some substances that interfere with the liver function and also can cause some products, even some drugs, to remain in our system longer, and it elevates the concentration of those in our system. Now, I don't want to go into all the pharmacology of that, but what I would say here is that sorry, am I going too fast for the internet? No, okay, all right. What I'm saying here is natural stuff is far better than extracted products. Where we can't do better, things like vitamin B12 and even some forms of vitamin D, they have to be extracted so that we can have them if you're a vegetarian. But where you can actually obtain these from eating natural coconuts or things that are rich in some of the products we're talking about. Iron is another typical example. Iron tablets, you get constipated. Go and eat spinach. You've got the roughage, you've got everything, yeah? And you won't get constipated. So this is what we're talking about here in terms of natural stuff and bioavailability and concentrating it. Yeah.
What else can I say but wow, what a day. What an explanation of God's word and health factors. Brethren, I would just like to say thank you so much, Dr. Maphango, and to our own Anslim there. Okay. I'm breaking out the house, am I? Yes. It's been so informative, Doctor. just a whole thing about how we can make it happen for us in our later years. And I think that's why Marlene chose me to say thank you, because I'm the eldest here. But thank God, because we are fearfully and wonderfully made, He has given us the knowledge in the form of the professionals to tell us what to do, how to do it, how we can maintain life. And we just want to thank you so much and hope by His grace that we remain mentally capable, that we can make decisions for God, choosing the way to pray His word. Dr. Anslim, them children we have here running around in the corridor who sometimes say, hallelujah, what's the matter with these parents? Please remember, those parents are our brothers and sisters, and whatever you would that men should do to you, do it to them. So let us show some empathy. Now we have more understanding of why. Let's go forth and shine. Brethren, knowledge is power. And today, our baskets have been filled with that. Let's walk forth from here, smarter, wiser. God is our Father. And for those of us who have been affected by disabilities and limitations, let us remember all is not lost. God is our maker. He is our restorer, and He's a healer. Let us pray. Father God, we just want to thank You for this beautiful day that You've made, the day of rest, the Sabbath, but where we could come into Your courts and learn of You about this wonderful body You gave us. You told us we are fearfully and wonderfully made, and that we now recognize. But knowing that we are incapable of sustaining ourselves, we come back to You asking, dear Lord, to restore us, to maintain that grace that we need in our lives to live for You. Whatever be our imperfections, we ask by Your grace that You'll make it right. We know You are interested in our well-being, for You have told us the very hair of our heads are numbered, and we are Your children, and our names are written in the palm of Your hands. So, Lord, we come to You, asking You to give us grace, to restore our minds and our bodies, and to help us to live for You in a manner that the world will see that indeed You are a good God and You have made us. So today and always, may we surrender our will to You, that You can use us, and bless our presenters, that they will continue to empower us and give us the knowledge to know what to do, that we will look after these beautiful bodies You have made for us. Today and always, bless us, guide us, restore us, heal us, and give us that hope that one day You're coming to give us an end to all of this sin, suffering, and confusion, where there be no more pain, no more sorrow, no more imperfections, but You, God, will be the light. Until then, keep us faithful, keep us hoping, we pray in Jesus' name.
One last thing before you go, and then I'm done. Just please acknowledge and appreciate our BSL interpreters. Pauline and Sherelle, thank you so very much for your support, for your expertise, for your willingness, for your patience. Thank you, thank you, thank you. You will notice that the deaf people have actually left, but they have continued. They're online. How wonderful that they can see and appreciate what hearing people have been able to do without any thought, any bother. They can go back in time and they can click on again and they can see. So to God be the glory. Thank you, and thank you both.